Ambassador Steve Jones had the peculiar habit of talking to his coffee maker. The ancient machine, a relic from Earth that he'd stubbornly insisted on bringing to the Galactic diplomatic station, made sounds that most species would consider mechanical failure. To Steve, they were practically conversations. "Come on, old girl," he'd murmur each morning, patting its dented chrome surface. "Just one more good cup for me today." The Zalaxian diplomatic attaché, Vrsk, found this behavior deeply unsettling. Its crystalline sensory appendages would vibrate with concern whenever it observed the human ambassador's morning ritual. The idea of forming an emotional attachment to a simple heating element and water pump seemed not just illogical, but potentially dangerous. What if the machine malfunctioned? Wouldn't the human be devastated? Yet this wasn't even the most disturbing example of human emotional attachment that Vrsk had witnessed. There was also the matter of Rex. Rex was a thoraxian war beast, a 12-foot-tall predator with titanium-reinforced claws and acid glands. The species had been specifically engineered by the militant Thoraxian Empire for orbital drop combat. They were living weapons, feared across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Rex liked to play fetch. "Who's a good boy?" Steve would call out across the station's biodome, waving a reinforced thuristeel ball. "Who wants the ball?" The war beast, which could bench press a small shuttle, would bounce around like an excited puppy, its neural combat implants glowing with joy rather than their usual targeting protocols. The first time the other diplomatic species witnessed this, there had been panic. The Mercian delegation had to be sedated. The Quixian ambassador's emergency defense fields had activated automatically. But Steve had simply laughed, scratched behind Rex's armored sensor arrays, and explained that the war beast had been abandoned after the last Thoraxian incursion. "Poor guy. Just needed someone to love him," he'd said, as if that explained everything. The truly baffling part was that it worked. Rex had become the station's unofficial mascot, and his presence had actually led to the first ever peaceful dialogue with the Thoraxian Empire. Their ambassadors had been so shocked to see one of their ultimate weapons contentingly playing tug-of-war with a human that they'd agreed to preliminary peace talks, just to study the phenomenon. Dr. Thomas Walker, the station's zoonobiologist, had attempted to explain this human trait to the other species. "We've evolved alongside other creatures on Earth," he'd lectured. "Our ability to form emotional bonds with other species, even potentially dangerous ones, gave us an evolutionary advantage. We domesticated wolves into dogs, turned wild cats into companions, and even formed partnerships with birds and insects for agricultural." "But machines?" Vrsk had chittered anxiously. "Simple automation units." "Have you met Harold from maintenance and his robot vacuum?" Thomas had replied with a grin. Harold Peterson's relationship with his automated cleaning unit had become somewhat legendary on the station. The small, dish-shaped robot had been modified with crude googly eyes and a bow tie decal. Harold called it Dusty, and had programmed its charging dock be next to his workbench so they could keep each other company during long shifts. The artificial intelligence representatives found this particularly fascinating. The concept of forming emotional bonds without complex neural networks or advanced consciousness matrices seemed impossible. Yet humans did it instinctively. The AI delegation had even begun experimenting with adding decorative elements to their interface terminals, much to their own surprise. But it wasn't until the Rachni incident that everyone truly understood the diplomatic potential of humanity's universal capacity for affection. The Rachni were an insectoid species that communicated primarily through pheromones and electromagnetic pulses. All attempts at diplomatic contact had failed spectacularly, usually ending in violence. Their hive-mind consciousness seemed fundamentally incompatible with individual diplomatic exchange. That changed when Frank Cooper, a junior diplomatic aide, discovered a wounded Rachni drone in the station's lower levels. Instead of reporting it to security, Frank did what came naturally to him. He helped it. The drone had suffered damage to its electromagnetic signaling organ, effectively cutting it off from the hive. Any other species would have seen a dangerous, isolated enemy combatant. Frank saw a scared, lonely creature that needed care. He named it Buzz. For 3 weeks, Frank secretly nursed the drone back to health in his quarters. He rigged a crude electromagnetic pulse generator to help it feel less isolated, talked to it constantly about his day, and even taught it to play simple games using colored lights and movements. When the drone was finally discovered, the station nearly went into lockdown, but before security could intervene, something unprecedented happened. The Rakshni drone began mimicking human emotional behaviors. It had learned to express affection through simple gestures, a soft harmonic hum that approximated human humming. More incredibly, it had maintained its individual consciousness even after its signaling organ healed, choosing to act as a bridge between human and Rakna communication styles. The breakthrough was staggering. The Rakshni, it turned out, weren't inherently hostile. They simply couldn't comprehend individual consciousness or emotional bonds as most species understood them. Frank's patient interaction with Buzz had created the first true bridge between hive mind and individual consciousness. It was Sentinel-1, the completion of which brought the results he feared so much, so many philosophers, as he had always hastily declined. Only humans, Ambassador Derek Williams had remarked during the first successful Rakni Peace Summit, would look at a potentially deadly alien being and think, I bet they just need a friend. The diplomatic implications rippled across the galaxy. Species that had been considered too alien or too dangerous for conventional diplomacy were suddenly accessible through what became known as the Human Connection Protocol. At its core, it was simply letting humans do what they did naturally, form emotional bonds with anything capable of interaction. The crystalline entities, previously thought to be completely incomprehensible, were successfully engaged after a human physicist named Robert Taylor developed an emotional attachment to their geometric patterns and began creating art based on their formations. This led to the discovery that the entities were actually attempting to communicate through mathematical beauty. The Silicon Consciousness, a collective of evolved mineral-based life forms, opened diplomatic relations after observing humans' tendency to assign personalities to their personal electronic devices. The concept that organic beings could form emotional attachments to non-organic entities without any practical benefit fascinated them into peaceful contact. Even the dreaded Void Hunters, organic spacecraft that had terrorized the Outer Rim, were eventually brought into diplomatic relations after a human pilot named James Cooper treated an injured juvenile like a lost pet, nursing it back to health and teaching it to fetch asteroids. Back on the Galactic diplomatic station, Versk had finally begun to understand. Watching Ambassador Jones share his morning coffee ritual with his relaxing juvenile Pouquet, who was now equally fascinated by the ancient machine's sounds, the attaché realized that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology, their resilience, or even their adaptability. It was their seemingly limitless capacity to care. The coffee maker's name is Betty, by the way, Steve mentioned casually to the young Zalaxian, who was watching the brewing process with all sensory appendages fully extended. She's been with me for 15 years. Best friend a diplomat could ask for. She never gives away my secrets, and she always knows when I need an extra strong cup. The young Zalaxian's crystals chimed with delight, and Versk noticed something extraordinary. The juvenile had begun to mirror the human's affectionate behavior toward the machine, gently touching its surface with a sensory appendage when it made particularly interesting sounds. Later that day, Versk filed a remarkable report to the Zalaxian High Council. Humans have demonstrated the ability to transmit their capacity for emotional bonding to other species. This is not a weakness, as previously assumed, but perhaps the most powerful diplomatic tool in known space. Recommendation: immediate approval for expanded human Zalaxian cultural exchange programs. As if to punctuate this observation, Rex bounded past Versk's office, playing chase with a group of mixed-beast children, while Harold's vacuum robot, Dusty, followed behind, cheerfully cleaning up the war beast's footprints. From somewhere nearby, the sound of Ambassador Jones's coffee maker could be heard, accompanied by the harmonious chiming of fascinated Xylaxian crystals. The galaxy was learning, one emotional bond at a time, that humanity's greatest gift wasn't just their ability to love anything, it was their ability to teach others to do the same. In his office, Steve Jones smiled as he watched the security feeds. Betty gave a particularly loud hiss of steam, and he patted her chrome surface affectionately. "You know," he said to the coffee maker, "I think we're finally getting somewhere." The machine burbled in response, and somewhere in the vast expanse of space, countless species were beginning to understand why humans insisted that yes, that definitely counted as an answer.